They found her on the fifth morning, curled beneath the chapel eaves like something forgotten. Laura Whitmore had arrived with a single letter, a worn shawl, and a promise that never came. The villagers whispered scandal, the cold whispered death. And when the Duke's carriage finally stopped, when his voice cut through the winter silence with those 6 words, no one could have predicted what would follow. This is not a story about rescue. This is about what happens when 2 people who have survived abandonment find love in the last place they expected to look. The train had left her there on a Tuesday. By Saturday, Laura Whitmore had become the favorite subject of every tea table and tavern conversation in the village of Thornfield. She sat on the stone bench outside the old chapel, her back pressed against the weathered wall, her arms wrapped tight around a leather bag that held everything she owned. The shawl around her shoulders was thin. The winter was not. 5 nights, 5 mornings. And still she waited. The station master had asked her to leave on the 2nd day. She had looked at him with eyes that were neither defiant nor pleading, simply exhausted, and said nothing. He did not ask again. The vicar had offered her the parish hall on the 3rd night, his voice thick with pity and suspicion in equal measure. She had declined, politely, firmly, as though she had a reason to stay exactly where she was. The villagers invented her story in whispers: a jilted bride, a fallen woman, a girl with no family and no future. They passed her on their way to the post office and averted their eyes. They watched from windows as she folded herself smaller against the wind, clutching that bag as though it contained not possessions, but proof of something. She did not beg. She did not cry. She simply waited, like someone keeping a promise no one else remembered. Laura had learned to make herself invisible. It was a skill born of necessity, honed in boarding houses and back staircases and rooms where women like her were tolerated but never welcomed. She kept her gaze low. She moved only when necessary. She made no sound that might draw attention. And when the children threw stones on the 4th afternoon, laughing as they ran past, she did not flinch. She only pulled the shawl tighter and stared at the road as though expecting someone who would never come. But someone did come. On the 5th night, as the cold pressed down like a weight on her chest and the sky turned the color of iron, Laura felt herself begin to slip, not into sleep, into something quieter, something final. Her fingers had stopped aching hours ago. Her breath came shallow and slow. She thought, distantly, that this was not how she had imagined it would end. She had imagined waiting. She had imagined hope. She had not imagined freezing to death on a stone bench while a village pretended not to notice. Then she heard it. The sound of wheels on frozen ground, the sharp click of hooves, the low, steady rhythm of a carriage that did not belong to anyone in Thornfield. Laura lifted her head. The carriage was black, polished, expensive. It stopped directly in front of the chapel, and for a moment, no one moved. The driver sat motionless. The horses stamped and breathed fog into the air. And then the door opened. He stepped down with the kind of precision that suggested he had never stumbled in his life. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a coat that fit him like armor. His face was all angles and control, the kind of face that made people step aside without being told. He did not look at the chapel. He did not look at the village. He looked at Laura. She stared back. He crossed the distance between them in 4 strides, his boots silent despite the frozen ground. He stopped just close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. They were dark, unreadable, not cruel, but not soft either. He studied her the way someone might study a painting, taking in every detail without judgment or pity. When he spoke, his voice was low and even, the kind of voice that did not need to be raised to command attention. Come. Laura did not move. He did not repeat himself. Instead, he shrugged out of his coat in one smooth motion and draped it over her shoulders. The weight of it was startling. The warmth even more so. She gasped, a small involuntary sound, and he stepped back as though giving her space to breathe. "You have been here long enough," he said. His tone was not unkind, but it was final. "Whatever you are waiting for is not coming." Laura felt something crack inside her chest. She wanted to argue. To insist that he was wrong, that the letter had been real, that the promise had meant something, but the words would not come. Because he was right. Whatever she had been waiting for had abandoned her 5 days ago. "I have nowhere to go," she said. Her voice was hoarse from disuse and cold. The man tilted his head slightly as though considering this. Then he held out his hand. "You do now." She looked at his hand, at the fine leather of his gloves, at the steady certainty in his posture. She looked at the chapel behind her, at the village that had watched her freeze, at the empty road that had brought her nothing but silence. And then she stood. Her legs trembled. Her fingers fumbled with the strap of her bag. But she stood, and she took his hand, and he did not let go even when she swayed. He steadied her with a grip that was firm without being rough, and then he guided her toward the carriage. The driver opened the door without a word. The interior was warm, lined with dark velvet, lit by a single brass lamp. Laura climbed inside and sank onto the seat, her body shaking not from cold now, but from the sheer relief of being somewhere that was not stone and wind and silence. The man climbed in after her. He sat across from her, straight-backed and composed, and pulled a thick blanket from beneath the seat. He handed it to her without ceremony. Laura wrapped it around herself and felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. She blinked them back. The carriage began to move. For a long time neither of them spoke. Laura watched the village disappear through the window, watched the chapel fade into shadow, watched the road stretch out ahead of them into darkness. She did not know where she was going. She did not know who this man was. But for the first time in 5 days, she was warm. Finally, she found her voice. "Why did you stop?" The man did not look at her. He stared out the opposite window, his expression unreadable, because no one else did. The simplicity of it struck her harder than any grand declaration could have. She opened her mouth to thank him, to say something, anything, but he raised a hand slightly, a gesture that was both gentle and absolute. "Rest," he said quietly. "You are safe now." Laura wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that safety was something that could be given, that warmth could last, that kindness did not come with conditions. But she had learned better. She had learned that promises were just words, and words could be broken as easily as they were spoken. Still, she closed her eyes. She let herself lean back against the seat. She let the rhythm of the carriage lull her into something that was not quite sleep, but not quite waking either. And as the cold finally began to leave her bones, she allowed herself one small, fragile thought. Perhaps this time she would not have to survive alone. The man across from her did not move. He sat in silence, his gaze fixed on the window, his expression betraying nothing. But his hand resting on the seat beside him was clenched into a fist, and if Laura had been awake, if she had been watching, she might have seen the way his jaw tightened, the way his breath came just a fraction slower, the way he looked at her just once with something that was not pity, it was recognition. The carriage rolled on through the night, carrying them both toward a place neither of them had expected to find, a place where the cold could not reach, a place where waiting might at last be over. But the road ahead was long, and the silence between them held more questions than either of them were ready to ask. The carriage traveled through darkness. Laura woke in fragments, her body jerking each time the wheels hit a rut, her mind pulling her back to the cold before remembering where she was. Each time she found him across from her, motionless, his gaze fixed beyond the window. He had not spoken since telling her to rest. He had not asked her name. The silence should have frightened her. Instead, it felt like the first honest thing she had encountered in weeks. When the carriage slowed, Laura sat straighter, fingers clutching the blanket. Through the window, iron gates opened, tall and ornate, flanked by stone pillars. Beyond them, a long drive stretched into shadow. "We have arrived." The carriage stopped. The driver opened the door, cold air rushing in. The man stepped out, extending his hand. Laura took it, legs unsteady, and looked up. The house was not a house, it was an estate. 3 stories of pale stone rose against the night, windows glowing, columns framing an entrance designed to make visitors feel small. It was nothing like anywhere Laura had ever belonged. She stepped back, panic rising. "I cannot," she began, voice breaking. "Sir, I do not know who you are. I cannot impose on such a place. I have no right. The man turned to face her fully. In the light, she could see him clearly now. Sharp, aristocratic features, dark hair swept back, jaw set in a line suggesting he was accustomed to being obeyed. But his eyes were not unkind. "My name is Walter Ashford," he said quietly. "I am the Duke of Thornmere. You have every right to be here because I brought you here." Laura's breath caught. A duke. She had gotten into a carriage with a duke wearing a threadbare dress. "Your Grace," she whispered, dropping into an awkward curtsy. "I did not realize—" "Stop!" His voice cut through her thoughts. She froze, eyes on the gravel. "Look at me." She did. Slowly. Walter stepped closer until she could see the fine weave of his waistcoat, silver buttons on his coat, his breath fogging in cold air. "You will not bow to me," he said softly. "Not here. Not in my home. You are not a servant. You are a woman who survived something that should have killed you, and that deserves respect, not submission." Tears pricked her eyes. She blinked furiously. "Why are you doing this?" Walter held her gaze, then looked toward the house, jaw tightening. "Because I know what it is to wait for someone who does not come." Before she could respond, he walked toward the entrance. Laura hurried after him, clutching her bag. The doors opened. A silver-haired butler appeared, expression betraying nothing as he took in Laura's appearance. Walter did not pause. "Prepare the East Wing guest chamber, hot water for a bath, a meal, clean clothes. Ensure the fire is lit and the room is warm." The butler bowed. "At once, Your Grace." "And Thomas," Walter added, voice lower. "No one speaks to her. No one questions her. No one enters her room without explicit permission." "Perfectly, Your Grace." Walter glanced at Laura. "This is Thomas. If you need anything, ask him." Laura nodded. Thomas bowed and disappeared. Walter gestured toward the grand staircase. "Come. You need warmth and rest." Laura followed, hand trailing the polished banister, eyes taking in paintings, crystal chandelier, thick carpet. Everything beautiful. Everything terrifying. They stopped at a door. Walter pushed it open. The room was larger than anywhere she had lived. A four-poster bed draped in deep blue. Fire crackling, writing desk by the window. A room for someone important. Laura turned, protest forming. Walter raised a hand. "I will not hear arguments. You will sleep here tonight. Eat, bathe, rest. Tomorrow we discuss what comes next. Tonight, you will simply be safe." Safe. Such a small word. Such an impossible promise. "How long may I stay?" Walter's expression softened barely. "As long as you need." He moved toward the door, paused. His voice carried clearly. "There is a lock inside. Use it if it makes you feel secure. No one will enter without permission, not even me." He stepped into the hallway. "Your Grace." He stopped. "Thank you." Walter stood still, shoulders tense, then looked back. For an instant, she saw something raw in his eyes. Understanding. "Do not thank me yet," he said quietly. "The world will have much to say about your presence here. You may regret accepting my protection." Laura lifted her chin. "I have learned to live with regret, Your Grace. I can manage a little more." Something flickered across his face. Surprise. Respect. He nodded, turned and walked away, footsteps echoing until they faded. Laura closed the door, turned the lock, then collapsed. She sank onto the bed and let tears come. Not sadness exactly. Release. 5 days holding herself together. 5 nights wondering if she would see morning. Now she was here, warm, protected, safe for reasons she could not fathom. A knock made her jerk upright. She wiped her face. "Yes?" A maid's voice, soft. "Begging your pardon, miss. I have your bath ready and some clothes. May I come in?" Laura opened the door. The maid was young, kind eyes, gentle smile. She carried folded fabric. Behind her, footmen carried a copper tub, steam rising. "Thank you," Laura whispered. The maid curtsied. "My name is Mary, miss. If you need anything, ring the bell by the bed." They set up the bath near the fire, laid out clothes, left quietly. Laura waited, then undressed. The water was hot. She sank in and felt cold finally leave her body. She scrubbed skin pink, washed hair clean, stayed until water cooled. When she climbed out, wrapped in a towel softer than anything she had touched, she caught her reflection. She looked different, not transformed, but alive, impossibly alive. On the bed, Mary had laid a nightgown of white linen and dressing gown of pale blue wool. Laura put them on, fingers fumbling with unfamiliar softness. They fit well enough, made for someone who belonged. She climbed into bed and pulled covers to her chin. Mattress soft, pillows smelling of lavender, fire crackling. On the pillow beside her a folded paper. Laura picked it up with trembling fingers. The handwriting was precise, elegant, masculine. You are safe here. No one will harm you. No one will touch you. Sleep without fear. W.A. Laura read the words 3 times, pressed the paper to her chest and closed her eyes. For the first time in longer than she could remember, she fell asleep without wondering if she would wake up. Without fear, without cold. Only warmth and the impossible gift of a stranger's protection wrapping around her like a promise she was not yet ready to believe, but desperately needed to hold. Laura woke to sunlight. It was such a foreign sensation that for a moment she did not recognize it. She had grown accustomed to waking in darkness, to cold seeping through threadbare blankets. But here, light streamed through tall windows, warming the blue canopy above her. The fire still crackled. The room smelled of lavender and wood smoke and something else she could not name. Peace, perhaps. A gentle knock at the door. "Miss?" Mary's voice, cautious. "I have brought breakfast." "May I enter?" Laura pulled the covers higher. "Yes." Mary entered carrying a silver tray laden with more food than Laura had seen in weeks. Toast with butter and jam, eggs with herbs, fresh fruit, tea in delicate porcelain. She set it near the window, then turned with that gentle smile. "His Grace thought you might prefer to eat in your room this morning. He did not want you to feel obligated to join the household until you are ready." Laura's throat tightened. Even in kindness, he was giving her choices. "Thank you," she whispered. "I have also brought day dresses. They belong to His Grace's late mother. He thought they might fit." Mary gestured to the wardrobe, now open to reveal several gowns in muted colors. Simple but well made. Not charity exactly, not pretense either. Laura walked to the tray, bit into toast, and nearly wept at the taste. Real butter, fresh bread, food given freely. Mary watched with understanding rather than pity. "When you are ready, there is also a bath being prepared. His Grace has requested that you be made comfortable in every way." Laura set down the toast, hands trembling. "Mary, why is he doing this?" The maid's expression grew thoughtful. "His Grace does not often explain himself, but those of us who have served him know this. He cannot abide cruelty. He cannot stand to see suffering when he has power to prevent it, and he does not forget what it means to wait for mercy that never comes." Laura heard the echo of Walter's words, "Because I know what it is to wait for someone who does not come. What happened to him?" Mary shook her head gently. "Perhaps someday he will tell you himself. For now, I will only say this. The Duke is a good man, a hard man sometimes, but good. You are safe here, truly." When Mary left, Laura ate slowly, savoring each bite. She bathed in the copper tub. She dressed in a gown of soft grey wool that fit surprisingly well. She brushed her hair until it fell in clean waves. In the mirror she saw someone she barely recognized, not the desperate woman from the station, not the frozen figure who had waited for rescue. Someone in between, someone still afraid, still uncertain, but no longer invisible. She left her room for the first time since arriving. The hallway was grand, but felt less intimidating in daylight. Portraits lined the walls. She walked slowly, listening to the sounds of the house, distant voices. Footsteps on floors below. The subtle creaking of a building that had stood for generations. At the bottom of the staircase she paused, uncertain where to go. "Lost, miss?" She turned to find Thomas, the butler, watching her calmly. "I did not wish to intrude. I only thought I might find somewhere to sit, perhaps a library." Thomas nodded. "The library is this way. His Grace is often there in the mornings. I believe he is working, but I am certain he would not object to your presence. Laura hesitated. I do not wish to disturb him. You will not. Follow me. He led her down a corridor and opened double doors without knocking. The library was magnificent. Floor-to-ceiling shelves filled with leather-bound volumes, tall windows streaming light, a massive hearth. And at a desk near the window, Walter sat with papers spread before him, his dark head bent in concentration. He looked up as she entered. For a moment, neither spoke. Laura felt suddenly exposed in borrowed clothes, uninvited and uncertain, but Walter simply set down his pen and stood. Good morning. I trust you slept well. Yes, Your Grace. Thank you. He gestured to a chair near the fire. Please, sit. You are not disturbing me. Laura sat, hands folded in her lap. Walter returned to his desk, but did not pick up his pen. Instead, he watched her with that same careful attention. The house is very quiet, Laura said, because the silence felt too heavy. It often is. I prefer it that way. Too many voices become noise. Too much noise becomes chaos. Laura nodded. She understood that. She had spent years trying to be quiet, to take up as little space as possible. But here, quiet felt different. Not like erasure. Like sanctuary. Walter stood and walked to the shelves. He selected a book and brought it to her. You mentioned wanting to sit somewhere. I thought you might prefer something to read as well. Laura took the book carefully. Poetry. The leather worn but well cared for. Thank you. Walter returned to his desk. For a long time they existed in the same space without speaking. He wrote, she read. The fire crackled. The clock ticked steadily. It was the most peaceful Laura had felt in years. Eventually she looked up and found him watching her, not staring, simply observing. Your Grace, she said softly, I need to know. What happens now? Walter set down his pen and leaned back. What would you like to happen? Laura blinked. No one had ever asked her that before. Decisions had always been made for her, about her, around her, never with her. I do not know. I have nowhere to go. No family to return to. The person who brought me here is gone, and I do not think they will return. Walter's jaw tightened. Then you will stay. Laura shook her head. I cannot simply stay. People will talk. They already must be talking. A strange woman in your home, with no chaperone, no explanation. Let them talk. Walter's voice was firm but not angry. I have never concerned myself with gossip, and I do not intend to start now. You are here because you needed shelter. You will remain here until you no longer need it. That is the end of the matter. Tears threatened. But what will people think of you, of your reputation? Walter stood and walked to the window, his back to her. When he spoke, his voice was quieter, almost distant. My reputation has survived worse than kindness. And if society chooses to condemn me for offering protection to someone who needed it, then society can continue its habit of being cruel and short-sighted. He turned back, expression softer than she had seen before. You will stay as long as you wish. You may help in the household if it gives you purpose, but you are not required to earn your place here. You are not a servant. You are not a burden. You are simply someone who deserves to be warm and safe and fed. Is that understood? Laura nodded, unable to speak. Good. Now I have work to finish. You may stay here and read or explore the house or return to your room. Whatever brings you comfort. He sat back down and picked up his pen, a clear dismissal, but not unkind. Simply his way of giving her space again, of not demanding gratitude or conversation or anything she was not ready to give. Laura opened the book of poetry and tried to read. But the words blurred because all she could think was this. For the first time in her life, someone had protected her without asking what she could offer in return. And as the afternoon light shifted across the library floor, as Walter's pen scratched quietly against paper, as the fire warmed her skin and the book rested in her lap, Laura felt something she had not felt in years, not just safety, not just warmth, but the beginning of something that felt dangerously close to hope. Basse 3 days passed in a rhythm Laura had never known before. She woke to sunlight and Mary's gentle knock, She ate breakfast in her room, or sometimes in the small morning parlor overlooking the gardens. She spent hours in the library, reading while Walter worked at his desk, their silence becoming a language of its own. She walked the corridors, learning the house's geography, its patterns, its quiet breathing. No one asked her questions. No one demanded explanations. The household moved around her like water around a stone, present but not intrusive. It was almost enough to make her forget that the world beyond these walls would not be so kind. On the fourth morning, reality arrived in the form of voices in the entrance hall. Laura was descending the stairs when she heard them. Two women, their tones sharp with curiosity, barely disguised as concern. "A guest, you say?" Thomas's voice was polite but firm. "His Grace does not discuss the private affairs of his household. But surely you understand our position," one woman pressed. "We are neighbors, friends of the family. If there is someone staying here who might need assistance, we would be happy to offer it. His Grace has made his wishes clear. The woman is under his protection. That is all you need to know." Laura froze on the landing, her hand gripping the banister. She should retreat, should disappear back into the safety of her room. But something kept her rooted there, listening. "Under his protection," the second woman repeated, and Laura could hear the smile in her voice. "How very interesting. And what is her name? Where does she come from? Surely His Grace would not object to us knowing that much." "I'm afraid I cannot help you, ladies." Thomas's tone had grown colder. "Now, if you will excuse me, I have duties to attend to." The women left, but their words lingered like smoke. Laura sank onto the step, her heart pounding. Of course people were talking. Of course they were curious. A strange woman appearing in the Duke's home with no background, no family, no explanation. It was exactly the kind of scandal society loved to dissect. She heard footsteps and looked up to find Walter standing at the bottom of the stairs. He must have heard everything. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes held something that might have been concern. "You should not listen to them," he said quietly. Laura stood, smoothing her skirt with trembling hands. "They are not wrong to ask questions, Your Grace. I am a scandal waiting to happen. Perhaps I should leave before—" "No." The word was absolute. Walter climbed the stairs until he stood just below her, close enough that she could see the tension in his jaw. "You will not leave because of gossip. You will not leave because frightened people need something to talk about. You will leave only when you choose to, and not a moment before." Laura felt tears threaten. "But your reputation—" "Is mine to manage," Walter interrupted, "not yours to sacrifice yourself for. I knew what I was doing when I brought you here. I knew what people would say. I did it anyway because it was the right thing to do." He held her gaze, and Laura saw something flicker in his eyes, something that went deeper than duty or kindness, something almost like defiance against a world that would judge them both. "Come," he said, his voice softer now. "Walk with me. The gardens are pleasant this time of day, and I find that fresh air helps clear the mind." Laura hesitated, then nodded. She descended the stairs and followed him through the house, out through tall glass doors that opened onto a terrace overlooking acres of carefully tended grounds. The gardens were beautiful even in winter. Bare trees stood like sentinels along gravel paths. Evergreen hedges provided structure and privacy. A fountain stood silent at the center, its water stilled by cold. They walked side by side, not quite close enough to touch, but near enough that Laura could feel the warmth radiating from him. "Tell me something," Walter said after a long silence. "What did you do before you came here? Before the station? Before the waiting?" Laura's breath caught. No one had asked her about her life in so long that she had almost forgotten she had one. "I worked," she said quietly. "In boarding houses mostly. Cooking, cleaning, mending, whatever was needed. I was not unhappy exactly, just invisible." Walter nodded slowly. "And the person who sent you the letter? The one who promised to meet you?" Laura stopped walking. She stared at the frozen fountain, her hands clenched at her sides. "A man," she said finally. "Someone I thought I could trust. He wrote that he had a position for me. A housekeeper role in a respectable home. He said I should come immediately, that the family was eager to meet me. I believed him because I wanted to believe him. Because the alternative was staying where I was, invisible and alone. And he never came, Walter said. It was not a question. No. Laura's voice cracked. I do not know if he ever intended to come. Perhaps it was a cruel joke. Perhaps he changed his mind. Perhaps I misunderstood everything. I do not know. I only know that I waited, and he did not come, and I would have died there if you had not stopped. Walter was quiet for a long moment. Then he turned to face her fully, and the anger in his eyes was not directed at her. What was his name? Laura shook her head. It does not matter now. It matters to me. The intensity in his voice startled her. She looked up at him and saw something she had not expected. Not pity, not even sympathy exactly, but a kind of protective fury that made her chest tighten. Why? She whispered. Why does it matter? Walter's jaw worked as though he were choosing his words carefully. Because no one should be allowed to do what he did to you. Because cruelty should have consequences. Because you deserve justice, even if you do not think you do. Laura felt something crack open inside her. She had spent so long blaming herself, wondering what she had done wrong, that she had forgotten to be angry. But Walter's anger, offered so freely on her behalf, made her remember what it felt like to believe she deserved better. His name was Thomas Brennan, she said quietly. He worked for a family in the city. He said he could arrange a position for me through them. That was all I knew. Walter nodded once, sharp and decisive. I will make inquiries. No, Laura said quickly. Please. I do not want revenge. I do not want anything from him. I just want to forget. Walter studied her for a long moment, then reached out and did something unexpected. He took her hand, his touch warm even through her glove, and held it gently. You may want to forget, he said quietly. But I will not, and I will ensure that he never has the opportunity to do this to someone else. Laura stared at their joined hands, at the way his fingers curled protectively around hers. It was the first time he had truly touched her, the first moment of physical connection beyond helping her into the carriage or handing her a book, and it felt like something shifting between them, something neither of them had quite acknowledged yet. Walter seemed to realize what he had done. He released her hand carefully, as though it were something fragile, and stepped back. Forgive me, he said. That was forward of me. No, Laura said quickly. It was kind. They stood in the cold garden, breath fogging between them, and Laura felt the world narrow to just this moment. This man who had saved her, this place that had sheltered her, this impossible, improbable connection that was growing between them like something inevitable. Your Grace, she said softly. Why did you really stop that night? At the station. You said you knew what it was to wait for someone. What did you mean? Walter looked away, his profile sharp against the grey sky. For a long time, she thought he would not answer. Then he spoke, his voice so quiet she had to lean closer to hear. I was engaged once, years ago. She was young, kind, beautiful, everything a man could want. We were to be married in the spring. I waited at the church for 2 hours before her father came to tell me she had changed her mind, that she could not bear the thought of marrying me. Laura's heart clenched. I am sorry. Walter shook his head. Do not be. She was right to refuse me. I was not ready to be a husband. I was cold, too focused on duty, too concerned with maintaining control. She saw that before I did. But standing there in that church, waiting for someone who would never come, I learned what it felt like to hope for something that did not exist. And when I saw you at that station, I saw that same futile hope. I could not leave you there. Laura understood then. They were both survivors of abandonment, both people who had waited for promises that were never kept, both learning, slowly, carefully, that perhaps they did not have to survive alone. Thank you, she whispered, for telling me. Walter met her eyes, and for the first time since she had known him, he smiled. It was small, barely there, but real. Thank you for staying. They walked back to the house in comfortable silence, and Laura felt something she had not felt in years. Not just safety, not just gratitude, but the beginning of something that felt dangerously, impossibly like belonging. The days began to blur together in the best possible way. Laura found herself settling into rhythms she had never expected to know. Mornings in the library with Walter, reading while he worked. Afternoons helping Mary organize the linen closet or mending curtains, not because she had to, but because idle hands made her anxious. Evenings by the fire in the small parlor, sometimes alone, sometimes with Walter sitting across from her, both of them reading in companionable silence. She was learning him. The way he took his tea without sugar. The way his jaw tightened when he was frustrated with correspondence. The way he stood at windows and stared at nothing when his mind was working through problems. The way he looked at her when he thought she was not watching, as though trying to solve an equation that had no answer. And she was learning something else. She was learning that she did not want to leave. It was a dangerous realization. This was not her home. This was not her life. She was a guest, a temporary presence, someone passing through on her way to nowhere. But every morning when she woke, every meal she shared, every quiet moment in Walter's presence, she felt herself rooting deeper into this place, into this impossible, improbable situation. On the 8th day, everything changed. Laura was in the library, organizing books Walter had left stacked on a side table. He had gone to the village on business, leaving her alone in the vast quiet of the house. She reached for a leather-bound volume and noticed a folded paper tucked between its pages. Without thinking, she pulled it out. It was a letter. Old, judging by the yellowed edges. The handwriting was feminine, elegant, careful. My dearest Walter, I write this with a heavy heart. I cannot marry you. Not because you are not good or kind or worthy, but because I am not brave enough to be what you need. You deserve someone who can match your strength, your certainty. I am too afraid of disappearing into your shadow. Please forgive me. Please do not wait. Elizabeth Laura's hands trembled. She should not be reading this. This was private, painful, none of her concern. But she could not stop. She read it 3 times, each word sinking deeper into her understanding of the man who had saved her. He had not just been left at the altar. He had been told he was too much, too strong, too certain, too everything. And instead of becoming less, he had simply become alone. She heard footsteps in the corridor and quickly tucked the letter back into the book. But her hands were shaking, and when Walter entered the library moments later, he took one look at her face and stopped. What happened? Nothing, Laura said too quickly. I was just organizing the books. Walter crossed the room in 3 strides. He looked at the book in her hands, at the slight fold of paper visible between its pages, and his expression went carefully blank. You read it. It was not a question. Laura felt heat flood her cheeks. She wanted to lie, to pretend, to protect both of them from this moment, but she had learned that Walter valued honesty above comfort. Yes, she whispered. I am sorry. I should not have. Walter took the book from her hands, removed the letter and stared at it as though seeing it for the first time in years. Then he folded it precisely and slipped it into his jacket pocket. Now you know, he said quietly. Now you understand why I stopped for you that night. Laura's throat tightened. Because you knew what it felt like. Walter turned away, walking to the window. He stood with his back to her, shoulders tense, hands clasped behind him in that formal posture she had come to recognize as his armor. I spent years trying to understand what I had done wrong, he said. Years trying to become less of whatever had frightened her away. Less cold, less demanding, less myself. And then I realized the truth. She did not leave because I was wrong. She left because she was afraid, and fear is not something I can fix. He turned back to face Laura, and his eyes were darker than she had ever seen them. When I saw you at that station, freezing and alone, I saw myself in that church, waiting, hoping, believing that if I just held on a little longer, the person I was waiting for would come. And I could not leave you there to learn what I learned, that sometimes the people we wait for never intended to come at all. Laura felt tears slide down her cheeks. She did not wipe them away. I did not come here looking for rescue, she said softly. I came looking for a position, a place, something solid in a world that kept shifting beneath me. And that man, Thomas Brennan, he promised me exactly that. Stability, safety, a future. and when he did not come, I kept waiting because I did not know what else to do. Walter stepped closer, and Laura saw something shift in his expression. Something that looked almost like pain. You deserved better than what he offered, better than a position, better than safety bought with someone else's mercy. What did I deserve? Laura whispered. Walter held her gaze for a long moment. Then he said very quietly, to be chosen. Not out of duty or convenience or pity, but because someone looked at you and thought, yes, her, always her. The air between them felt charged, electric. Laura could not breathe, could not think, could only stand there feeling the weight of words that meant more than either of them was ready to admit. The sound of footsteps in the corridor broke the moment. Thomas appeared in the doorway, his expression carefully neutral. Forgive the interruption, Your Grace, but you have a visitor, a Mr. Thomas Brennan. He says he has come to speak with you about a personal matter. Laura felt the blood drain from her face. Walter's expression went stone cold. Show him to my study, Walter said, his voice like ice. I will be there momentarily. Thomas bowed and disappeared. Walter turned back to Laura, and she saw something dangerous in his eyes, something protective and furious and barely controlled. Stay here, he said. Do not come downstairs. Do not let him see you. What are you going to do? Walter's smile was sharp enough to cut. I am going to ensure he never waits for anyone again. He left before Laura could respond. She stood frozen in the library, heart pounding, torn between obeying his command and needing to know what would happen. She could hear voices rising from the study below, Walter's, low and controlled, another man's, defensive and uncertain. She moved to the door, unable to stop herself. She needed to hear this, needed to know. Laura crept to the top of the stairs and listened. I do not know what you are talking about, Brennan's voice said, confused and irritated. I came because I heard rumors that a woman matching a certain description was staying here, a woman I was supposed to help secure a position for. I wanted to ensure she arrived safely. Safely, Walter repeated, and the word dripped with contempt. You left her waiting at a train station for 5 days in the dead of winter. You promised her a position that never existed. You abandoned her to freeze to death, and now you come here speaking of safety. There was a long silence. Then Brennan's voice, smaller now. I do not know what she told you, but she misunderstood. The position fell through. I sent word. You sent nothing. Walter's voice was deadly quiet. You used her desperation to lure her to a place where no one knew her, where no one would look for her, and then you left her there. And I want to know why. Another silence. Laura pressed her hand to her mouth, barely breathing. It was a misunderstanding, Brennan said finally. Nothing more. If she is here safe and well, then surely no harm was done. No harm, Walter repeated. Mr. Brennan, let me be very clear. That woman is under my protection now, and anyone who threatens what I protect will find that I have a very long memory and very little patience for men who prey on the vulnerable. You will leave my property. You will never contact her again. You will never speak her name. And if I hear even a whisper that you have attempted something similar with anyone else, I will personally ensure that every door in society closes to you. Do I make myself understood? Laura heard footsteps. Brennan leaving quickly, his humiliation palpable even from a distance. She turned and hurried back to the library, her heart racing. Minutes later, Walter appeared in the doorway. He looked at her, and they both knew she had not stayed hidden as he had asked. But he did not reprimand her. Instead, he crossed the room and did something he had never done before. He pulled her into his arms. It was not romantic, not calculated, just exhausted relief and protective fury, and something neither of them had words for yet. Laura felt his heart pounding against her cheek, felt his arms solid and warm around her, and realized she was crying. It is over, Walter murmured into her hair. He cannot hurt you anymore. I will not let him. Laura pressed her face against his chest and let herself break. Not with grief this time, with release, with the overwhelming realization that she was not alone anymore, that someone had chosen to stand between her and the world, that someone had looked at her and thought, yes, her worth protecting, worth choosing. When she finally pulled back, Walter's hands lingered on her arms, his touch gentle but firm. "You deserve better than this," he said quietly. "Better than hiding. Better than fear. Better than me." Laura looked up at him, at the man who had saved her, sheltered her, protected her without asking anything in return, and she said the only true thing she knew. "I do not want better than you. I just want you." The words hung between them, impossible and inevitable, and for the first time since she had known him, Walter looked uncertain, vulnerable, almost afraid. "Laura," he whispered, "you do not know what you are saying." "I do," she said. "I know exactly what I am saying. And I know you feel it too." Walter's jaw tightened. His hands fell away from her arms. He stepped back, creating distance that felt like miles. "What I feel is irrelevant. You are here because you needed shelter, not because you chose me. And I will not take advantage of that. I will not become another man who asks you for something you are not ready to give." "I am ready," Laura said, her voice stronger than she felt. "I am ready to stop hiding, to stop waiting, to start choosing for myself. And I choose this. I choose you." Walter closed his eyes as though in pain. Then he opened them and looked at her with something that made her breath catch. Not duty, not protection, but want. Real, raw, undeniable want. "If I let myself have this," he said quietly, "if I let myself have you, I will not let you go." "Good," Laura whispered, "because I am tired of being let go." Taosti Kimase. If you are finding yourself drawn into their story, wondering what happens next between Laura and Walter, subscribe to the channel. And tell me in the comments, if you were in Laura's position, would you have stayed hidden like Walter asked, or would you have listened at the door? I am curious what you would choose. 3 days after Brennan's departure, an envelope arrived bearing the seal of Lady Harrington, one of the most influential hostesses in the county. Walter opened it at breakfast, read it once, then set it down with an expression Laura could not quite read. "What is it?" she asked from across the table. They had fallen into the habit of sharing morning meals, a quiet intimacy that felt both natural and terrifying. "An invitation," Walter said, "to the winter ball at Harrington Manor. It is the social event of the season. Everyone who is anyone will be there." Laura felt her stomach tighten. "And you wish to attend?" Walter looked at her, and something in his gaze made her breath catch. "I wish for you to attend." "With me?" The room went very quiet. Laura set down her teacup carefully, as though sudden movement might shatter whatever was happening between them. "Your Grace, people will talk." "They are already talking," Walter interrupted gently. "They have been talking since the moment you arrived. The question is not whether they will notice you. The question is whether I care, and I do not." He stood and walked around the table until he was standing beside her chair. He did not touch her, but she could feel the warmth of him, the solid presence that had become as necessary to her as breathing. "I want them to see you," he said quietly. "I want them to understand that you are under my protection, not as a servant, not as someone to be pitied, but as someone I have chosen to stand beside." Laura looked up at him, her heart racing. "This is more than protection." "Yes," Walter said simply. "It is." The admission hung between them, heavy with possibility. Laura knew what he was offering, not just attendance at a ball, but acknowledgement, public declaration, the beginning of something that could not be taken back. "I have nothing to wear," she said finally, and Walter smiled. It was becoming less rare, that smile, and every time she saw it, she felt something in her chest expand. "That," he said, "has already been taken care of." Mary arrived that afternoon with 3 dressmakers and enough fabric to clothe an entire household. They measured Laura, discussed colors and styles, and within 2 days had created a gown that made her feel like someone she did not recognize. It was deep blue silk, simple in design, but elegant in execution. The neckline was modest but flattering. The waist cinched perfectly. The skirt fell in soft folds that whispered when she moved. When she looked at herself in the mirror, she saw not a woman waiting to be rescued, but a woman who had been chosen. The night of the ball arrived with cold clarity. Walter called for her at her door, dressed in formal black that made him look even more imposing than usual. But when he saw her, His expression softened into something that made her feel beautiful for the first time in her life. "You look," he said, then stopped. Started again. "You are extraordinary." Laura felt heat rise in her cheeks. "It is only a dress." "No," Walter said quietly. "It is not." The carriage ride to Harrington Manor was silent, but not uncomfortable. Walter sat across from her, his gaze steady, and Laura felt the weight of what they were about to do. They were stepping into society together. They were making a statement neither of them could take back. When they arrived, the manor was ablaze with light. Carriages lined the drive. Music and laughter spilled from open doors. Walter helped Laura down, and she felt every eye turned toward them as they ascended the steps. Inside, the ballroom was magnificent. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light across polished floors. Women in jewels and silk clustered in groups, their fans moving like birds' wings. Men in formal dress stood with glasses of wine, their conversations pausing as Walter and Laura entered. Lady Harrington approached immediately, her expression carefully neutral. "Your Grace," she said, curtsying, "how delightful that you could attend." "Lady Harrington," Walter replied with perfect courtesy, "may I present Miss Laura Whitmore? She is my guest this evening." The emphasis on guest was subtle but clear. Laura curtsied, keeping her gaze steady even as she felt the weight of 100 eyes assessing her. "How lovely," Lady Harrington said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "I do hope you enjoy the evening, Miss Whitmore." She moved away, and immediately the whispers began. Laura could feel them like insects crawling across her skin. She wanted to run, wanted to hide, wanted to be anywhere but here. Then Walter's hand found the small of her back, warm and steady, and she remembered to breathe. "They know nothing about you that matters," he murmured near her ear, "and their opinions matter even less." A woman approached, older, draped in emeralds and judgment. "Your Grace," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness, "I do not believe we have had the pleasure of meeting your companion." "This is Miss Whitmore," Walter said evenly. "She is staying at my estate." "How interesting," the woman said, and the word was a weapon. "And where does your family hail from, Miss Whitmore?" Laura felt the trap closing. Before she could answer, Walter stepped forward slightly, a subtle shift that placed him between Laura and the woman. "Miss Whitmore's family is her own business," he said, his voice pleasant but edged with steel. "As is her presence in my home. I trust there will be no confusion on that point." The woman's smile faltered. "Of course not, Your Grace. I meant no offense." "I am certain you did not," Walter said, and the dismissal was absolute. The woman retreated, and Laura released a breath she had not known she was holding. "You did not have to do that," she whispered. "Yes," Walter said quietly. "I did." The evening progressed in waves of tension and relief. Some guests were kind, curious, but respectful. Others were cruel, their barbs wrapped in politeness. But Walter remained beside her, a constant presence deflecting every attack with the ease of someone who had spent years navigating society's cruelty. When the dancing began, Walter turned to her and extended his hand. "Will you dance with me?" Laura hesitated. "I am not practiced, Your Grace. I may embarrass you." Walter's expression softened. "You could never embarrass me. And it is just Walter. When we are together, it is just Walter." Laura placed her hand in his, and he led her onto the floor. The waltz began, and Walter's hand settled on her waist, warm and sure through the silk of her gown. His other hand held hers gently, and they began to move. Laura stumbled once, twice, but Walter steadied her without drawing attention, his movements guiding her through the steps. And then something shifted. The room faded. The watching eyes disappeared. There was only the music and the warmth of his hand on her waist, and the way he looked at her, as though she were the only person in the world who mattered. "You are doing beautifully," he murmured. "I am terrified," she admitted. "So am I," he said, and the honesty of it made her look up at him in surprise. "Of what?" "Of this," Walter said quietly. "Of wanting something I have no right to want. Of caring more than I should. Of not being able to let you go even though I know I should." Laura's breath caught. "Then do not let me go." Walter's hand tightened on her waist, pulling her just slightly closer. The movement was subtle, almost imperceptible, but Laura felt it in every nerve. They moved together as though they had been dancing their entire lives, as though their bodies knew something their minds were still afraid to admit. When the music ended, they stood still for a moment too long, breathing in sync, the world slowly coming back into focus around them. Then Walter stepped back, releasing her with visible reluctance, and led her from the floor. They found a quiet corner near the terrace doors, away from the crush of the crowd. Walter handed her a glass of champagne, and their fingers brushed, sending electricity up her arm. "Thank you," she said softly. "For this, for all of it." Walter looked at her with an intensity that made her knees weak. "Do not thank me yet. The night is not over, and I suspect the worst is still to come." He was right. A man approached, well-dressed and confident, his smile too familiar. "Miss Whitmore," he said, and Laura's blood turned to ice. It was someone who knew Thomas Brennan, someone who had heard the stories. "I believe we have a mutual acquaintance," the man said, his tone pleasant but his eyes sharp. "Thomas Brennan. He mentioned you might be in the area." Walter went very still beside her. Laura felt panic rise in her throat. "I do not know what you mean," she said, her voice barely steady. "Oh, I think you do," the man said, his smile widening. "And I think His Grace should know exactly what kind of woman he has invited into his home." Walter stepped forward before Laura could draw breath. His movement was subtle but decisive, placing himself between her and the man whose smile had turned predatory. "Mr. Garrett," Walter said, his voice pleasant but cold as winter frost, "I do not believe we have been properly introduced to warrant you addressing my guest so informally." The man, Garrett, had the decency to look momentarily uncertain, but his confidence returned quickly, bolstered by the audience gathering around them. Whispers spread like ripples across water. "Your Grace," Garrett said with an exaggerated bow. "Forgive my presumption. I merely wish to warn you that the woman at your side is not what she appears to be." Laura felt the floor tilt beneath her. She wanted to run, to disappear, to wake up from this nightmare. But Walter's hand found hers, hidden in the folds of her skirt, and squeezed once. "Stay," the gesture said. "Trust me." "I know exactly what Miss Whitmore is," Walter said, each word precise and deliberate. "She is a woman of courage and dignity who has survived circumstances that would have broken lesser people. Now, unless you have something of substance to say, I suggest you remove yourself from my presence before I remove you myself." Garrett's smile sharpened. "Oh, I have plenty of substance, Your Grace. Thomas Brennan is a business associate of mine. He told me about this woman, how she tried to trap him with false promises, how she followed him here uninvited, how he had to turn her away because she was, shall we say, unsuitable for respectable employment. The lie was so smooth, so confident, that for a moment Laura could not breathe. She felt the eyes of the entire ballroom on her, judging, condemning, finding her guilty without trial. "That is not true," she said, but her voice came out weak, broken. Garrett turned to her with mock sympathy. "Is it not? Then tell us, Miss Whitmore, why did you come to Thornfield? What were you hoping to gain?" Laura's throat closed. She could not speak, could not defend herself. Every word she might say would only make it worse. Walter released her hand and took a step toward Garrett. The movement was casual, but something in his posture made several people step back. "Mr. Garrett," Walter said quietly, and his voice carried a danger that made the room go silent. "You have just called my guest a liar in my presence. You have impugned her character based on the word of a man who abandoned her to die in the cold. And you have done so in front of witnesses, which means I can now respond without any concern for civility." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "Thomas Brennan lured Miss Whitmore here with false promises of employment. He left her at a train station in the dead of winter for 5 days. When I confronted him about this, he could barely meet my eyes, much less defend his actions. So, if he has now invented a story that makes him the victim, it is because he is a coward who cannot face the consequences of his cruelty." Garrett's confidence wavered. "Your Grace, I only meant to—" "You meant to humiliate a woman who has no powerful family to defend her," Walter interrupted. "You meant to use gossip as a weapon because you thought I would not protect her. You were wrong. He turned to address the room, his voice carrying to every corner. Let me be absolutely clear. Miss Whitmore is under my protection. Anyone who speaks against her speaks against me. Anyone who questions her character questions mine. And anyone who attempts to harm her reputation will find that I have a very long memory and considerable influence in ensuring that doors which were once open become permanently closed. The silence was absolute. Laura felt tears burning behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Not here, not in front of these people who had already decided she was not worthy of their world. Lady Harrington appeared at Walter's elbow, her expression carefully neutral. Your Grace, perhaps we might continue this conversation in private. There is nothing private about this, Walter said, his gaze still fixed on Garrett. Mr. Garrett made his accusations publicly. I am defending Miss Whitmore publicly. That is how honor works, Lady Harrington, though I understand some people have forgotten. Garrett's face flushed red. You cannot threaten me, Your Grace. I have friends. Influence. Not anymore, Walter said simply. By tomorrow morning, every person in this room will know that you attempted to destroy an innocent woman's reputation based on lies from a documented coward. Your influence, such as it was, is finished. He turned back to Laura and offered his arm. We are leaving. Laura took his arm with trembling hands. They walked through the ballroom together, every eye following them, whispers rising in their wake. But Walter kept his head high, his posture perfect, and Laura tried to match his strength even as she felt herself breaking inside. The carriage ride home was silent. Laura sat across from Walter, staring at her hands, unable to meet his eyes. She had ruined everything, his reputation, his standing, his future, all because he had been kind enough to save her. I'm sorry, she whispered finally. Walter looked up sharply. For what? For all of it? For being there at the station? For accepting your help? For letting you bring me to that ball? I have destroyed you. Walter leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his gaze intense. Laura, look at me. She did, reluctantly. You have destroyed nothing, he said firmly. Those people, that world, they were destroying me long before you arrived. They were suffocating me with their expectations and their judgments and their endless, meaningless rules. You did not ruin me. You reminded me why I stopped caring what they thought in the first place. Tears spilled down Laura's cheeks. But your reputation is still perfectly intact, Walter interrupted gently. I am a duke, Laura. They can gossip all they want, but they cannot touch me. And more importantly, I do not care if they could. I would rather have you in my life and their disapproval than their approval and an empty house. The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Laura wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that this could somehow work, but fear had been her companion for too long. Why, she whispered, why do you care so much? Walter was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was raw with honesty. Because when I look at you, I do not see someone who needs to be saved. I see someone who saved herself by surviving when she should not have. I see strength that puts mine to shame. I see a woman who chooses kindness even when the world has given her every reason to be cruel. And I see the only person who has ever made me want to be better than I am. He reached across the space between them and took her hand. I am not protecting you out of duty, Laura. I am protecting you because losing you would be unbearable. Laura felt something crack open in her chest, not breaking, opening. Like a door she had kept locked for so long she had forgotten it existed. Walter, she breathed. He stood and moved to sit beside her, his hand still holding hers. Laura, I know this is too much. I know I am asking for something you may not be ready to give, but I need you to know, I need you to understand. This is not obligation. This is choice. My choice. To stand with you. To fight for you. To... He stopped himself, as though the next words were too dangerous to say aloud. To what? Laura whispered. Walter looked at her, and she saw everything he was trying not to say written in his eyes. Love, want, need, fear, hope. To keep you, he said finally. If you will let me. Laura felt her heart stutter. She should say no, should protect them both from the impossibility of this. But she was tired of protecting herself, tired of being careful, tired of waiting for permission to want something. "Yes," she said. The word was barely a breath, but it was enough. Walter's eyes darkened. "Laura." "Yes," she repeated, stronger now. "I'm tired of being afraid, tired of running, tired of thinking I do not deserve to be chosen. So yes, Walter, keep me. And I will keep you." Something in Walter's expression cracked. The careful control he maintained so perfectly shattered, and he pulled her into his arms with a force that stole her breath. It was not gentle, it was desperate and relieved, and terrified and hopeful all at once. Laura wrapped her arms around him and held on, feeling his heart pounding against her chest, feeling his breath against her hair, feeling the solid reality of him surrounding her. "I will not let them hurt you," he murmured into her hair. "I will not let anyone hurt you ever again." "I know," Laura whispered back, "and I will not let you face them alone either." They held each other as the carriage rolled through the darkness, two people who had survived abandonment finding something neither had expected to find. Not rescue, not salvation, but partnership, choice. The beginning of something that felt less like safety and more like home. They returned to the estate in silence, but it was a different kind of silence than before. Charged, electric, full of words neither of them dared to speak yet. Thomas met them at the door, his expression carefully neutral as he took their coats. Walter dismissed him with a quiet thank you, and suddenly Laura and Walter were alone in the vast entrance hall, the house sleeping around them. Walter turned to her, and Laura saw something in his eyes that made her breath catch. Not just want, not just affection, but a question, an invitation, a choice offered freely with no expectation of acceptance. "Would you?" he began, then stopped. Started again. "Would you like some tea before retiring?" Laura knew what he was really asking. He was giving her an exit, a way to end this night safely, properly, without crossing lines that could not be uncrossed. And she loved him for it, even as she decided not to take it. "I am not tired," she said quietly. Walter's eyes darkened. "Neither am I." They stood there for a long moment, the space between them humming with possibility. Then Walter extended his hand, and Laura took it. He led her not to the parlor or the library, but down a corridor she had never explored. They climbed a different staircase, narrower than the main one, and emerged into a hallway lined with portraits. At the end, Walter opened a door. His private study. Smaller than the library, more intimate. A fire already burned in the hearth, left by a servant who had anticipated his master's return. Bookshelves lined one wall. A desk sat by the window. A sofa faced the fire, deep and inviting. Walter released her hand and moved to the sideboard. He poured 2 glasses of brandy and handed her one. Their fingers brushed, and Laura felt that touch like lightning up her arm. She took a sip. The brandy burned, warming her from the inside. "You were extraordinary tonight," Walter said softly. "The way you held yourself together when Garrett attacked you, the way you refused to let them break you. I have never admired anyone more." Laura set down her glass with trembling hands. "I was terrified." "I know," Walter said. "That is what made it extraordinary." He set down his own glass and stepped closer, close enough that Laura could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, the shadow of stubble along his jaw, the way his chest rose and fell with each breath. "Laura," he said, his voice rough, "if you want to go to your room, if you want to end this evening here, I will understand. I will never ask for more than you want to give." Laura looked up at him, at this man who had saved her, protected her, chosen her again and again without demanding anything in return. And she made her choice. "I do not want to go to my room," she whispered. "I want to stay here, with you." Walter closed his eyes briefly, as though steadying himself. When he opened them, Laura saw everything he had been holding back. The want, the need, the careful control beginning to fracture. "Are you certain?" he asked, and his voice was barely steady. "Yes." The word was simple, absolute, and it changed everything. Walter reached up slowly, giving her time to pull away, and touched her face. His fingers were warm against her cheek, gentle but firm, and Laura leaned into the touch like someone starving. "I do not want to rush this," he murmured, his thumb tracing her cheekbone. "I do not want to take more than you want to give." "Then do not rush," Laura said softly. "Just do not let go." Walter's other hand found her waist, and he pulled her closer, slowly, carefully, until there was barely any space between them. Laura could feel the heat of him, smell the faint scent of sandalwood and soap, see the way his pupils had dilated until his eyes were almost black. "Tell me if you want me to stop," he whispered. "I will not want you to stop," Laura breathed. Walter bent his head and kissed her. It was not their first kiss, but it felt like the first real one, slow and deep and full of all the things they had been too afraid to say. His hand tightened on her waist, pulling her flush against him, and Laura gasped at the sensation. She had never been this close to anyone, had never felt this wanted, this chosen, this real. Walter's lips moved to her jaw, her neck, the hollow of her throat, and Laura felt her knees go weak. She gripped his shoulders, holding on as though he were the only solid thing in a world that had suddenly gone liquid. "Walter," she breathed. He pulled back just enough to look at her, his breathing ragged. "Laura, we should slow down. I do not want slow," Laura interrupted. "I want you, all of you. Now." Something in Walter's expression cracked completely. He cupped her face in both hands and kissed her again, deeper this time, less controlled. Laura kissed him back with everything she had, pouring years of loneliness and fear and hope into the connection between them. Walter's hands moved to the buttons at the back of her dress, and he paused. "May I?" "Yes," Laura whispered. He undid the buttons slowly, reverently, his fingers careful and sure. The dress loosened, and Laura let it fall, standing before him in her chemise and corset, suddenly shy but not afraid. Walter looked at her as though she were something precious, something miraculous. "You are so beautiful," he murmured. "So are you," Laura said, and she meant it. She reached up and began to unfasten his cravat, her fingers fumbling slightly. Walter helped her, shrugging out of his jacket, his waistcoat, until he stood before her in just his shirt and trousers, and Laura could see the shape of him, the strength barely contained. They moved to the sofa together, a tangle of limbs and breathless laughter and gentle touches. Walter laid her down carefully as though she might break, and Laura pulled him down with her, wanting the weight of him, the realness of him. His hands explored slowly, learning the curves of her body through the thin fabric of her chemise. Laura arched into his touch, feeling things she had never felt before, wanting things she had never allowed herself to want. "Walter," she breathed. "Please." "Are you certain?" he asked again, and she loved him for asking, even now. "I have never been more certain of anything," she whispered. Walter kissed her deeply, and his hand moved to her thigh, sliding up slowly, giving her time to change her mind. But Laura did not want to change her mind. She wanted this, wanted him, wanted to be wholly, completely his. What followed was gentle and intense, careful and passionate, a slow joining that felt less like losing something and more like finding everything she had been searching for. Walter moved with her, breathed with her, whispered her name like a prayer against her skin, and Laura held him, feeling the weight of him, the warmth of him, the absolute rightness of this moment. When it was over, they lay tangled together on the sofa, breathless and overwhelmed and impossibly content. Walter pulled a blanket over them, tucking it around Laura carefully, and she rested her head on his chest, listening to the steady thunder of his heartbeat. "I love you," Walter said quietly into the darkness. "I did not mean to, I tried not to. But I do. I love you." Laura felt tears prick her eyes, but they were good tears, happy tears. "I love you too," she whispered. "I think I have loved you since the moment you told me to come, that I was safe with you." Walter's arms tightened around her. "You are safe with me," he murmured. "Always. For as long as you want me." "Forever then," Laura said softly. "I want you forever." They lay there in the firelight, two people who had survived abandonment finding home in each other's arms, and for the first time in either of their lives, the silence was not empty. It was full. Full of love and promise, and the certain knowledge that they would never have to be alone again. Laura woke in Walter's arms as dawn light filtered through the study windows. For a moment, she simply lay there, feeling the rise and fall of his chest beneath her cheek, the weight of his arm around her waist, the warmth of the blanket he had tucked around them sometime in the night. She had never felt more at peace, more whole, more exactly where she belonged. Walter stirred, his hand moving gently through her hair. "Good morning," he murmured, his voice rough with sleep. "Good morning," Laura whispered back. He pulled back just enough to look at her, and what she saw in his eyes made her breath catch. Not regret, not doubt, but certainty. Joy. Love so clear it needed no words. "I want to marry you," he said simply. "Not because society demands it, not because of what happened last night, but because I cannot imagine my life without you in it." "Will you marry me, Laura?" Laura felt tears spill down her cheeks. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Walter. 1,000 times, yes." Walter kissed her then, slow and deep and full of promise. When they finally pulled apart, he smiled, and Laura realized she would spend the rest of her life trying to earn that smile. "We should speak with the vicar today," Walter said, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I want this done properly, publicly. I want everyone to know that you are mine, and I am yours." "What about the scandal?" Laura asked. "What about what people will say?" Walter's expression hardened slightly. "Let them say what they will. By the time we are married, anyone who speaks against you will find themselves unwelcome in every respectable home in the county. I have already begun making inquiries about Garrett and his associates. They will learn that there are consequences for attacking someone I love." Laura sat up, clutching the blanket to her chest. "Walter, you cannot ruin people on my behalf." Walter sat up beside her, his expression serious. "I am not ruining anyone, Laura. I am simply ensuring that the truth is known. Garrett lied. Brennan abandoned you. They do not deserve protection from the consequences of their own actions." He took her hand, threading their fingers together. "I will not let you be hurt again. Not by them. Not by anyone. That is what it means to be mine, Laura. You get all of me. My protection. My name. My power. Everything I have is yours." Laura felt something warm unfold in her chest. "And you get all of me," she said softly. "My heart, my loyalty, my love. Everything I am is yours." They dressed slowly, helping each other with buttons and laces, laughing at their own fumbling, stealing kisses between adjustments. When they finally emerged from the study, the house was beginning to wake. Mary appeared in the hallway and stopped short, her eyes widening as she took in their disheveled appearance and intertwined hands. Then she smiled, warm and genuine. "Congratulations, Your Grace. Miss Whitmore." "Thank you, Mary," Walter said. "Please inform Thomas that we will be going to the village this morning, and please prepare Miss Whitmore's finest dress. We have an announcement to make." By midday they were in the village. Walter had sent word ahead, and half the town seemed to have gathered in the square, curious about what the Duke had to say. Laura stood beside him, her hand on his arm, trying not to tremble. Walter addressed the crowd with the same authority he had shown at the ball. "I have gathered you here to make an announcement," he said, his voice carrying clearly. "Miss Laura Whitmore has done me the great honor of agreeing to become my wife. We will be married within the month, and I expect every person in this village to show her the respect due to the future Duchess of Thornmere." Whispers rippled through the crowd. Laura felt eyes assessing her, judging her, but Walter's hand covered hers, steady and sure. "I am aware," Walter continued, "that there has been gossip about Miss Whitmore's presence in my home. I am here to make the truth absolutely clear. She came to this village because she was promised employment by a man who abandoned her to die in the cold. I found her and offered her shelter because it was the decent thing to do, and I fell in love with her because she is the most courageous, dignified woman I have ever known." He turned to look at Laura, and the love in his eyes silenced every whisper. "She deserves better than the cruelty some of you have shown her, and I intend to spend the rest of my life ensuring she receives it." The crowd was silent for a long moment. Then the vicar stepped forward, his expression kind. "Congratulations, Your Grace. Miss Whitmore, I would be honored to perform the ceremony." Others followed. tentative at first, then with growing warmth. Shopkeepers offering congratulations, women curtsying, men bowing. Not all of them, not everyone, but enough. Enough for Laura to feel the weight of judgment beginning to lift. As they walked back to the carriage, a figure stepped out from the shadows of a building. Thomas Brennan, looking pale and frightened. "Your Grace," he began. "I wanted to explain." "There is nothing to explain," Walter said coldly. "You are fortunate I am a civilized man, Brennan. If I were not, this conversation would be very different." Brennan's gaze flickered to Laura. "I never meant for things to go so wrong. The position was real. I swear it. The family changed their minds at the last moment, and I could not find you to tell you." "You did not look," Walter interrupted. "You did not care. You left her there and forgot about her because she was not important enough to matter to you. But she matters to me, and that means you no longer exist in my world. Leave, now, and do not come back." Brennan opened his mouth to protest, then thought better of it. He turned and hurried away, and Laura felt a chapter of her life closing behind him. In the carriage on the way home, Walter pulled Laura close. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly. Laura leaned into him, breathing in his scent, feeling his warmth. "I am more than all right," she said. "For the first time in my life, I am exactly where I am supposed to be." Walter kissed the top of her head. "So am I." The next weeks passed in a blur of preparation. The banns were read, dresses were fitted, invitations were sent. And through it all, Laura felt herself transforming not into someone new, but into the person she had always been, beneath the fear and the hunger and the constant need to disappear. She was Laura Whitmore, soon to be Laura Ashford, a woman who had survived abandonment and found love, a woman who had been chosen and had chosen in return, a woman who was no longer afraid. The night before the wedding, Walter found her in the library, reading by the fire. He sat beside her and took her hand. "Are you having second thoughts?" he asked, half teasing but with an edge of real concern. Laura set down her book and turned to face him. "Not one," she said firmly. "Are you?" Walter smiled, that rare, beautiful smile that she had come to treasure. "Not a single one. I'm only afraid that I will wake up and find this was a dream." Laura leaned in and kissed him softly. "Then we will wake up together," she whispered, "and prove it is real." They sat there in the firelight, hands intertwined, two people who had waited for promises that never came, finding all the promises they needed in each other. Tomorrow, Laura would walk down an aisle and speak vows that would bind her life to his. Tomorrow, she would become a duchess, a wife, a partner in building something neither of them had thought possible. But tonight, she was simply Laura, and he was simply Walter, and that was more than enough. The fire crackled, the clock ticked, and outside, the world that had once seemed so cold and cruel continued turning, unaware that inside this house, two people had found the one thing that mattered more than survival. They had found home. The morning of her wedding, Laura woke to find snow falling softly outside her window. It was the first snow since those 5 terrible nights at the station, but this time, watching the white flakes drift down felt like a benediction rather than a curse, like the world was being washed clean. Mary helped her dress in a gown of ivory silk, simple but elegant, with lace at the sleeves and neckline. No elaborate veil, no excessive jewelry. Just Laura, as she truly was, preparing to stand beside the man who had seen her at her lowest and chosen her anyway. "You look beautiful, miss," Mary said, her eyes bright with tears. "The Duke is a fortunate man." "I am the fortunate one," Laura said softly. The church was small, the ancient chapel in the village where Walter's family had worshipped for generations. Laura had expected a small ceremony, intimate and quiet. But when Thomas drove her there in the carriage, she found the pews filled with people from the estate, from the village, even some from neighboring counties who had heard the story and come to witness it. They were not all friendly. Some faces showed curiosity, others skepticism. But they were there. They were watching. And that meant something. At the back of the church, Thomas offered her his arm. "It is an honor, miss," he said quietly, "to walk you down this aisle." Laura felt tears prick her eyes. "Thank you, Thomas, for everything." The doors opened, the small organ began to play, and Laura walked forward into her future. Walter stood at the altar, and when he turned to watch her approach, the look on his face made everything else disappear. The doubting faces, the whispers, the weight of judgment. All of it faded until there was only him, looking at her as though she were the answer to every question he had ever asked. She reached him, and he took her hand, his grip warm and steady. "Hello," he whispered, "just for her." "Hello," she whispered back. The vicar began the ceremony, his voice steady and kind. Laura heard the words as though from a great distance. Love, honor, cherish, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, until death parts us. Ancient promises, worn smooth by generations of repetition, but feeling new and vital when spoken here now between them. "Do you, Walter Ashford, Duke of Thornmere, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do," Walter said, his voice clear and certain. "Do you, Laura Whitmore, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Laura looked into Walter's eyes and saw everything they had survived to reach this moment. The cold, the abandonment, the fear, the slow, careful building of trust, the choice to love despite every reason not to. "I do," she said. Walter slipped a ring onto her finger, simple gold that caught the light streaming through the stained glass windows. Laura placed a matching band on his, her hands steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm her. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the vicar said, smiling. "You may kiss your bride, your grace." Walter cupped Laura's face in his hands and kissed her softly, reverently, as though sealing a promise that went deeper than words. The church erupted in applause, not universal but genuine, and Laura felt something shift inside her chest. Not completion, exactly, because she had been complete before Walter, but recognition, the acknowledgement that she was no longer alone in carrying her own weight. They walked back down the aisle together, hand in hand, and Laura saw Mary crying happily in the front pew, saw villagers smiling despite their reservations, saw the world beginning to accept what she and Walter had already known. She was worthy. She always had been. She had just needed someone to stand beside her while she remembered. The reception was held at the estate, in the grand ballroom Laura had cleaned and organized, but never imagined she would celebrate in, tables laden with food. Champagne flowing freely, music and laughter and warmth. Walter danced with her again, his hand on her waist in that same spot that made her breath catch, and Laura felt the circle close. From that first waltz at the ball, where she had been a stranger to be pitied, to this moment where she was his wife, his partner, his choice. "I love you, Laura Ashford," Walter murmured against her ear. "I will love you until the day I die, and if there is anything beyond, I will love you there too." Laura pressed closer to him. "I love you, Walter. Thank you for stopping that night. Thank you for seeing me when I had convinced myself I was invisible." Walter pulled back to look at her. "You were never invisible, Laura. You were just waiting for someone worthy of seeing you." As evening fell and guests began to depart, Walter took Laura's hand and led her away from the ballroom, through corridors she now knew by heart, to a room she had never entered. His bedroom. Their bedroom now. He opened the door, and Laura stepped inside to find a space that was both masculine and welcoming. Dark wood furniture, a massive bed with deep blue linens, a fire burning in the hearth, and on the bedside table, a single object that made her throat tighten, the note he had left her that first night. "You are safe here, no one will harm you. Sleep without fear." "You kept it," she whispered. Walter came to stand beside her. "It was the first promise I made to you. I wanted to remember it. Wanted to make sure I never forgot what it felt like to offer protection and have it accepted." Laura turned into his arms. "You have kept every promise you ever made to me," she said softly, "and I intend to keep every promise I made to you." Walter kissed her then, deep and thorough, and Laura felt the last walls between them crumble completely. They undressed each other slowly. No urgency now, just the quiet joy of knowing they had all the time in the world. They made love by firelight, tender and passionate and infinitely patient, and afterward lay tangled together in sheets that smelled of lavender and home. "Do you remember?" Walter said quietly, his fingers tracing patterns on her shoulder. "What I said that first night? About not letting you go?" Laura smiled against his chest. "You said if you let yourself have me, you would not let me go." "I meant it," Walter murmured. "But I was wrong about one thing." Laura lifted her head to look at him. "What?" Walter brushed hair from her face, his touch infinitely gentle. "I said I would not let you go, but the truth is, you were never mine to hold or release. You are your own person, Laura, strong and whole and complete without me. What we have is not me holding you. It is both of us choosing every day to build something together." Laura felt tears slide down her cheeks. "I choose you," she whispered, "today and tomorrow and every day after. And I choose you," Walter said, "my wife, my love, my home." They fell asleep wrapped in each other, the fire burning low, the snow falling softly outside, two people who had survived the cold finding warmth in each other's arms. Spring came eventually, as it always does. The estate gardens bloomed. The village gradually stopped whispering. Laura found her place not as a duchess trying to fit a role, but as herself, using her strength and compassion to help others who had been left behind as she once was. She never forgot those 5 nights at the station, never forgot what it felt like to wait for someone who would not come. But she also never forgot the moment Walter's carriage stopped, the moment he said, "Come, you are safe with me," the moment everything changed. She had not been rescued, she had been seen, chosen, loved, and in loving him back, she had finally learned the truth she had spent her whole life searching for. She had always been worthy. She had always been enough. She had just needed someone brave enough to stand beside her while she remembered how to stand on her own. And now, standing on the terrace of her home with Walter's arms around her and spring blooming in every direction, Laura Ashford knew with absolute certainty that she would never be cold again. Sometimes the people who save us are not the ones who rescue us from our circumstances, but the ones who stand beside us while we save ourselves. Laura learned that love is not about being completed by someone else, but about being seen, chosen and valued exactly as you are. And Walter learned that strength is not about control, but about offering protection while honoring another person's autonomy. Together they built something that neither could have built alone. Not rescue, not salvation, but partnership, home, love that chose to stay even when it could have walked away. What about you? Have you ever felt invisible waiting for someone to see you? Have you ever found home in an unexpected place? If this story touched your heart, I would be honored if you would leave a like. Your support means everything to this channel and helps these stories reach others who might need them. And if you are not yet subscribed, please consider joining us. Finally, I would love to know, where in the world are you listening from right now? Drop your location in the comments. Knowing you are out there wherever you are makes these stories feel like a conversation rather than a monologue. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. Until the next story, may you always remember that you are worthy exactly as you are.